important to us. I am so excited for tonight's guest, Molly Colleen O'Connell. I have been reading Molly's work now for, I want to say, close to 20 years. I first encountered her work when she was part of a collective of cartoonists coming out of Baltimore, art students in Baltimore. And closed caption comics consisted of the artists Molly Goldstrom, Connor Stetchelt, Lane Milburn, Noel Freebert, Aaron Womack, Ryan Cecil Smith, Andrew Nyer, Chris Day, Simone Thornton, Xavier Shavani, Pete Raison, Eric Steiner, Zach Hazard, Jordan Jeffries, and Adrian Figgis. And when I encountered, and of course tonight's guest, Molly Colleen O'Connell, and when I encountered this work as an early art comics reader, literary comics reader, their work was really, really a revelation to me, and I kind of can't explain how important finding this work was to me. The best way I can describe it is encountering a group of young working artists who were actively engaged in making comics, really believed in the art form of comics, really, believed in it passionately, and made beautiful work right off the bat within the medium of comics. But most of them, I mean, they came from all different disciplines, but most of them seem to be coming to the idea of making comics with less of an allegiance to a childhood of reading traditional Western comics or a traditional entry point that maybe the generation prior to them, the alternative comics generation, had. They really seem to be approaching this medium maybe as art students first, and then bringing that trajectory fully into a commitment of making comics and using the form for their own purposes. And that was incredibly exciting to me, just as someone who cares about comics and just as a reader who wanted to read very beautiful printed stories. And in addition to their anthology, they self-published their own titles. And their self-publishing was very beautiful in presentation, but very, very inviting as well. There wasn't a kind of austere sensibility to it. Molly Colleen O'Connell's work in this group was to me one of the most exciting examples for my own artistic interests, in that Molly had, right, from the first publications and first stories I saw from her, such a assured way of drawing figures, way of moving figures through space, way of presenting her stories. And she was taking this base of very sophisticated drawing ability and applying it to comics in a way that everyone in closed caption comics made very free work. And I would say that Molly's work, for what I was interested in, felt the most free. It felt the most committed to making comics. It wasn't breaking away from what comics could be, but it seemed to owe the least allegiance to systems and rules of the past. It had this kind of seamless meeting of someone wanting to work with this form, and an assurance in their own ability to make comics, but without a overwhelming allegiance to paying tribute to the past. And I think that has continued in Molly's work. I was so excited by her work that when I founded my company, Domino Books, one of the first people I contacted about doing a comic was Molly. And she did this incredible comic for us in the early 2010s called Difficult Loves. She has constantly, throughout my time knowing her, been producing mini comics, self-published publications of all kinds. I would say in the last few years, fans of Molly Colleen O'Connell are really, we've been so lucky in that she is currently doing two separate self-published series, and they're coming out very regularly. And I would say, Molly might correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say in the last couple of years, there have been five very substantial, really some of the best work Molly has ever made. We have the Pebble series, which is now up to issue 3. And we have Shriekers, which is up to issue 2. So I think for people who might be new to Molly's work, this is such a lucky time, and that there's so much work coming out from Molly that is You know, as a fan of her work for so long, this is some of the most beautiful work I've seen from her. So I feel very grateful for that. Um, I am going to now turn things over to Molly. I believe she's going to show us some of her sketchbooks. But what I want to say is, as she's presenting her sketchbooks, feel free in the chat to ask a question of any kind. I can either, at the end of Molly's presentation, I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I can after I ask my questions, I can call on you to read the questions you've put in the chat out loud, or I can read them for you. Just indicate in your question what you'd like me to do. So without further ado, I present to you Molly COLLEEN O'CONNELL.
Hmm. All right. Hey, everybody. Hi. So thank you for that great intro. I am not going to speak on it because it'll make me feel weird, but it was very kind. And I owe a lot of gratitude to Austin for always being really supportive. Just to break the ice a little, I'll show what he was kind of getting at. Here are some issues of closed caption comics from vaults of the past. Can't get these in stores. And then I'll show a little bit of
Could we see a bit more of those? Maybe flip through them a little, Molly?
okay. Which one?
Any of them.
Okay. I'm gonna have to get rid of this. Okay, so this is the very Chico hiding. This is actually the first issue I was in. This was in 2000. I don't think we would put years on things enough. So always put the year on there because books have a really long life, even zines. But I'm guessing like 2003-ish. This is like the 5th issue, I think, maybe 2002. And then this was my first contribution, which was just 3 wee pages, and kind of shows like I really was not making comics necessarily at this time. My background's actually as a printmaker, and so I was doing like screen print work, but the sequence of time was interesting to me. Actually, at the time, I was making a lot of masks and doing like performance, and it was actually I think Connor who said like, oh, actually, you're kind of doing something with time here. You really should do comics. This is an early Lane Milburn. This is an early Molly Goldstrom. This is an early Chris Day. Hillary Sproat. Oh, we forgot Hillary Sproat. God damn it. There were a lot of people over the years. Some people would just be in one issue, like we said, but then there was a core group. And maybe by the later issues, like these bigger ones, there were more sort of significant investigations, and everybody kind of was bringing a really different sensibility. And like what Austin mentioned, like a different sort of background or pathway to comics. And then this was our last, where we finally like threw everything we could. A lot of those were made with just like free copier, free copies at school, or like the little funding we got as a school club. And then this was kind of a culmination of sales and people like, putting their own money in to make our like kind of final big effort. This was my contribution. Story about these 3 brothers who had a morning show. Whatever. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to get my rhythm. Hold on. Okay, reset. Now we're doing good. Okay. This is just a culmination of like what I could find today, again, in the vaults, like early screen printed minis. I was really inspired by like antique children's book forms. and like playing with folded materials. This was like a collection of etchings mixed with screen prints that I was selling, called an edition called Oborat Adubada. I was playing a lot with language at the time and mixing words around. This was a book of etchings. I think I made like 3 of these. That was something the reason I wanted to do kind of like a book share, or like a sharing of like live feed, because, well, one, I giving slide lectures makes me feel like I'm at work. That's teaching, but also I think picture story brought to mind like these objects that we collect and make, and we run out of, or some we sell, some we just give to people, but they have these kind of remnants of where your brain or what kind of stories you were telling at the time. And maybe they don't mean anything once they look, this one's like sunburned. Once they sort of, you run out of the edition, but then maybe later they can have like renewed meaning. This was like a big newsprint called the Jaslyn. And there would also be like different iterations of things. So this was a zine called Don't Tell Mom that was inspired because I was asked to do my first comics reading. And I, did a lot of like joke writing at the time, and I couldn't understand why I would read a comic in front of people. So basically I made this comic as like an excuse to write these really filthy text messages in drawings. And then I printed like a really big version. Who knows what the editions were of this one. This is probably like 30 copies or something. This was BBB's diary. This was another, also, like, I think I was still in school when I finished this. There's some screen printing and Xeroxing going on. I read this for the first time in years today, and actually don't hate it as much as I thought I did.
That one you just showed was a really like that was, it wasn't one of the first ones I saw from you, Molly, but it was a very important one for me in like forming what I thought comics could do. That was, I remember that one specifically.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think I was trying to like do a lot more than my skills maybe were ready at the time with comics, like the way I was trying to use text and tell stories. And
Could
that's
I
why.
also, I'm sorry to interrupt, could you lift it up a little bit? Because it's getting like the screen is showing, we're seeing it, but just a little like, there we go. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Uh yeah. I I don't hate it anymore. I figured that out today. And thank you for saying that. It's that's also why I really appreciate like making the physical object, because you can like keep it on your shelf and not look at it for a long time and then come back to it and recognize like, oh, maybe I was doing something here. Because as artists, it's really hard in the moment to appreciate uh, when something comes out and you're not sure if it's, living up to what it would be in your head. Um, this is another version. I made so many versions of Don't Tell Mom. It was the first thing that really resonated with people that I made. I felt like. This is a book of troll drawings that was part of an exhibition I had of sculptures making up like an internet troll den. But at the time, and still a lot of my work is found in drawing, even if the final form isn't a book or in drawings. And that's kind of, the meat of what we'll get to, is showing that process and how so much of like my work comes through in sketchbooks and figuring things out through that like sort of space. And this is kind of an early version of eventually what Colorama put out in 2024. So Colorama, this amazing publisher in Berlin, did this sort of book of work that coexists with my comics work, but doesn't, always get seen in the same sort of breath. And this was kind of an early version of that, like a lot of the writing and sketchbook work that I do. It's a strip mall. This is gonna come back in style one day. This is what Austin was talking about. This was, I don't know, this was something funny I found today and I forgot about. It came with, at the time, like a ceramic CD. And it was like trying to make and play with the idea of like a narrative multiple. But it was like supposed to be a CDR of pop music. And then this was a book called Pichiesa, which means piss church, which, yeah, I can't get into that right now. It's too much. So all of this to say, I was making a lot and doing a lot of self-publishing. And then I got to this point where I was doing all this other work that was kind of demanding my attention a little more than comics, and seemed really necessary, like performance and video and sculpture. And it was in 2019, I was just talking about Colorama. Johanna from Colorama and Aisha have this residency called Clubhouse. That's, a way that they get a bunch of artists from different countries together for a week to talk about their process and how they make stuff. And I went there in 2019 and made this comic. And I had kind of taken a few years off from comics before that, or they just were like not as like much of the definitive part of my work. And it was really exciting, just like seeing all these people's process and just like wanting to really dig back into comics again. Oh shit. Well, whatever. So this is a sketchbook from 2019. Like I said, I was like coming back to comics, and I don't know, I just wanted to do this kind of like I've gone to a bunch of comics exhibitions in the past few years and met a bunch of artists, and actually was quite surprised how many said they have no sketchbook practice, and that they don't really see a point in like a sketchbook practice that doesn't lead to have like a means to an end. And that is, I don't know, baffling to me, because sketchbooks have been like my most consistent art practice. And the reason I'm limiting it to the past few years is because it would be an obscenely way too long, really boring show if I did, the whole gamut. And I was told to reel it in by, wiser folks. And yeah, and so this is just like kind of a run of like what just kind of comes out of my brain at the time. Some of this is, kind of, I was working on the early iteration of Shriekers. So I was doing, you can see like traces of that. And this was also like building up towards Pebbles in 2019. Like those were the two kind of narratives I was working on at the time. You can also see a lot of these drawings. At this time, I was working on a piece for the MCA exhibition, Chicago Comics 1960s to Now, that Dan Nadell curated. And this is the final version of that install, which was a like 12-foot tall newsstand that I hand created, every piece of. It kind of felt like an abandoned puppet set for, I don't know, teaching kids about how to be radical. And so you can see like a lot of, I kept kind of drawing it over and over again to kind of like get a sense of like what I wanted that space to look like or feel like. Oh, and then here's again early Shriekers drawings of the characters. That there's like they're kind of basic ideas are set out in here, but you know they got a lot more fully formed as time went. And yeah, let's go to the next sketchbook. All right, we're going to 2020. Boom, terrifying year. What is this, Eddington? And here's like a figuring out the paneling for Shriekers, the first issue. This is also just like me trying to be generous because I want to see more like of people's sort of sketch process. And that's like the most interesting thing to me often in an artist talk is just seeing sketchbooks or their sort of, I don't know, how they like the I guess I called this, right, spelunking the clown's crevasse. Like what are the things that happen between the things that your viewers or your readers see? That's what we're doing. We're spelunking. This was early 2020. Shout out to all of the cartoonists I make videos answering these questions. Austin, I think, yeah, you definitely did this, and a couple other people. I never finished public or editing that because it was hell and I was looking at a computer all the time. But I do have that footage for one day when I can stand to look at a computer long enough. So this is 2020, losing our minds, drawing, kind of. At this time, I was making a lot of those airbrush T-shirts. So sometimes like doodles would find themselves or find their way into my airbrush sort of practice or the studio practice. This is also like a Shrieker's idea that came to fruition. This is again, oh, this was research on my grandfather. So the newsstand piece was also really inspired by my grandfather worked as an illustrator. He was doing covers for pulp magazines. I never met him, he died before I was born. But he was an illustrator and a painter. And the newsstand was based on a photo of him in front of the newsstand with my grandmother in the 1930s. And all over the newsstand were issues of this magazine Look with two actors kissing with masks on. So working on that in 2020 just felt like a weird sort of, the world is just constantly repeating itself. Here's more sort of trying to figure out. I knew I wanted this alligator sort of running the stand, and then I was trying to figure out like what other, you know, sales folk could also kind of live in that space. This is just the book you have to make before you die. I feel like cartoonists think about that a lot. We all have like that book that we're like, this has to come out at some point. And also at this time, my mother was very sick, or by this time dead. Sorry. And I was making a lot of comics. Nope. You know, this is the thing. Okay. So sometimes I start a sketchbook at one time and then it ends in another. So this is me like reusing these pages because she didn't die till 2021.
So she's still alive. Here, she's still alive.
Here no, in this comic, she is dead. But in this year, she is alive. If you have a dead parent, you get it. It's all confusing time. Now this is 2021, and these are a lot of the first sort of drawings of pebbles are in this sketchbook. This is maybe the first ever drawing of pebbles. At first I knew she was maybe going to like travel time, and I just knew the uniform of this like version of just like sweatpants, socks, and vibes.
Molly, can I
And
ask you just to push up this sketchbook just a little? The other one was perfect, but just as you start, perfect. Thank you.
thanks, thank you, Austin. Um, and yeah, just like drawing her sort of over and over, like thinking about, I would often like write myself questions to answer about her, um, or put her in different contexts to try to like figure her out. Um, and I had, she had kind of like a lot of pathos. This was also again 2021, so kind of um imbued with like a lot of anxiety or worry about the world.
Can I
Um,
ask, with these initial drawings of this character, are you we both teach, and sometimes when we're working with students, they work out storyboards to develop their characters or they write notes, and I'm always kind of conflicted with students working this way. I kind of think, well, maybe you should just start drawing the character in a story and you'll find out who they are that way. Are you with these sketches, are you kind of formulating what this character means to you, or are there other sketchbooks where you're writing out notes about the character, or is it really like the development of your characters and your stories come from these initial drawings first?
I think this was oh, I think I usually spend a lot of time with the character drawing it like this, especially maybe this was like the most sort of obsessively I was doing that because I was doing a healthy amount of drawing at this time, and I knew I wanted to make a comic uh with this character, but I had to like spend a lot of time drawing her, but this is before any kind of storyboarding starts, but I do that as well. Like for like Pebbles, I do get into like um thumbnailing and storyboarding once I'm like starting an issue, but this was like I wasn't even thinking about story necessarily yet. I was specifically like just trying to figure out who this character was, and doing like kind of automatic writing exercises. um but I know what you mean. I don't know, it's hard to teach that process, especially when you're working with like being in a classroom and like having 3 months to learn how to make comics. This is like kind of a um having like the generous amount of time to kind of like create a relationship through drawing the character isn't something you always have, right? Especially as a student. And this is also like, all of those zines I showed at the beginning were narratives I felt really tied to and was like, oh, I'm gonna make this huge crazy story out of, and then just kind of like either lost steam on or um, still needed to figure out what I wanted to do with my comics. But by this time I felt a lot more confidence, and a lot of that is from teaching and like spending time with students and like coming up with exercises that hone you in on like how to tell a story in panels, because I kind of had to figure that out. um I don't know, through like reading comics, but also through just doing it over and over again with students. I feel like I learned a lot. um and Pebbles, a lot of this timelines like kind of mirror like uh when she was in middle school is kind of like the same sort of age I was at that time, like early 2000s. um and so I was doing drawings of like, sometimes these are actually of my own childhood, but then some of them are of like people I knew or friends, and kind of like trying to develop the character into a melange of like people I knew, because I didn't want it to just be like a version, like a mirror of my own life. And then I also, do a lot of drawing. Um, and this is, something I do. I encourage my students to do too, like trying to recreate drawings by other artists. So this is a Larry Evans Invisibles Hidden Picture Puzzles. So I loved these books as a kid, where like it was a huge ink drawing and you had to find, an owl in it or like four bats in it. And he was really great at that and trying to figure out his style. This is Gordon Brooks, Clam Shack Cookery. These are some bugs. More bugs, more people. And then a lot of these too, I often I live near Chicago, and the Field Museum is one of my favorite places to go to draw. It's just full of taxidermied animals, mostly all collected by this one weird guy in the beginning of last century. But you know, they're there for us to draw and not have to exhume. This is a drawing of my mother on her when she was sick, and eventually passed of cancer. She would always kind of lay in the bed in this like very strange pose that looked like a drawing. Like, you know, a lot of people say the figures I draw have like these weird kind of poses and positions. And it was just kind of natural to draw. This is also her. So I was spending this time visiting her a lot in Florida and just like sitting by her and drawing. Sometimes her, but she hated it when she caught me drawing her. So sometimes I would just like have to draw characters. And that was also like reminding me, you know, when like drawing can be like this comfort, and that it was this thing I can like rely on as catharsis. And I think sometimes when, yeah, you teach art for a living and you're making art and you're selling it, you kind of like, it's easy to lose that relationship to it. And that's what kind of sketchbooks remind me or keep me in tune with. A lot of pebbles. I was also flying a lot, so I was drawing at the airport a lot. And then I started doing these comics, kind of like trying to process the emotions I was feeling, like having, you know, watching someone like slowly fade away. And it's a really lonely, isolating time. I have a lot of friends who've lost a parent in the past few years, and it's not a club you want to be in. But there it also does feel like kind of this weird rite of passage, and trying to use comics as a way to like kind of reckon with my feelings in that moment. This is my dad asleep with an iPad. Here she is again. Sorry, I don't want it to get too repetitive.
I mean, these are all great, Molly. So keep, you know, seeing any of them is wonderful. So don't edit any out if you think you're being repetitive, because I doesn't seem repetitive to me at all.
Oh, okay. I also just, yeah. Well, okay. Thank you. Okay, I'll slow down. And yeah, this is my sister's dog that only had one eye, and who is also, you know, often in the room visiting with her. Here are my parents holding hands with my mom's dog under the bed. And then when she passed, yeah, this is sort of around the time when she passed. There was, I don't know, like kind of refiguring out your role in a family, especially when the person who kind of like, so I come from a big family. I'm the youngest of 7 children, and she did a lot in kind of like keeping us connected and together and trying to figure out like, okay, now how are we connected as siblings? And I think that's something that like continues for a while. This is my sister's yard. She's a really incredible gardener, and that's kind of how we stay connected. And you know, I learned a lot about gardening from her and from my mom. I think this is the last drawing I did with my mom alive. I was drawing my cats who were home, and I was trying to like, this is me like desperate for anything to like uh feel any positivity, because I knew it was coming. I knew this. God, isn't this sad, this moment? Here's a gator like waiting for a kid gator to jump in. This is like just this like trying to, I don't know, transport yourself through drawings. And then actually the next day I went with my nieces to the museum because we had been planning to, but now there was just this big loss. And we were trying to like kind of cope with it through, you know, looking at art and drawing each other, and trying to find comfort in some way. Um, oh, this is based on an Ivan Brunetti exercise. I do a lot of Ivan Brunetti exercises with my students. So there will be these interruptions, right, between these like sad drawings. And then it's like, oh, wait, got to get back to work. Got to teach the kids. They got to learn how to make comics. Okay, now go back to meditating on what you're thinking about. Like that's also what I like about these sketchbooks is they're like kind of a transport to that time period, but also like the because of how rigid of a practice I have where I try to draw like every day, it's kind of showing the like insane chaos of like how time passes. It's kind of like a diary, but a little it's still vulnerable, but it's a little less like direct. This is like 2022. And so I was I don't know, kind of figuring out I think issue 1 of Pebbles had come out and issue 1 of Shriekers. This is from a comic. I ended up not getting published for an anthology about these pterodactyls kind of making this giant trash effigy as they kind of take over the world post humans. And I also, one of my, you know, we talked about teaching earlier. One of my favorite classes I teach every year is a introduction to drawing class for adults that have a range of like background, but a lot of them are completely new to drawing. And it's kind of my favorite class to teach because it is like the most like beginner, but with some skill that I get access to. You know, I've taught like really young kids through, you know, older generations. And everyone loves the model. I mean, some of them get really stressed out, but like drawing from life just has this ability to like challenge people, but also I don't know, like help them develop, you know, their sort of language because of Mark making based on something in front of them that isn't perfect and that moves. And so that's always, you know, something I love doing. This is the first iteration of Feral MILF No Morals, the t-shirt I ended up making that was inspired by a quote in the first issue of Pebbles. At first, I knew I wanted it to be just this like completely off the wall Feral MILF. And then I don't know, it's just seen like early renditions. And then this is also figuring out the second issue of Pebbles, how I wanted here's the eventual cover. It was inspired by the scene in Blade Runner when he's at the sort of noodles stand eating, but, you know, sort of changed and translated for Pebbles. And oh, this is some Connor drawing. Also, yeah, drawing with other people has always been like an important. I feel like a lot of early CCC was just sitting together and doodling and you know, just doing kind of like drawing games. And bouncing off of each other, uh, to kind of like find a way to think through mark making, right? And not have like a set idea on the onset of what you're drawing. These are some drummers. There's always the bucket drummers in front of Art Institute, and I loved one day a woman asked them, "Who are your favorite drummers?" One guy said, "I like Keith Moon. I like Neil Peart." All right. This is 2023. Hold on. Oh, okay, clearing here. Okay. This is after Johnny Gruelle, the creator or one of the artists behind Raggedy Ann and Andy. Here's Elizabeth Upham, another children's book author. So as Austin kind of mentioned earlier, I guess I should say a lot of my interest or relationship to comics or narrative stories was inspired by reading children's books, like well after the age we should, or we're told to. And so that's why I often do a lot of studies from those drawings. This is again from the Field Museum, Grieving Halls of Evolving Hideous Pain. Let's see, next book. So this is 2023. 2023 is very fruitful year for drawing. So this is when I was starting to do comic shows again, and meeting artists, like more young and older cartoonists, and feeling like back sort of in the saddle, because I don't know, someone had said to me like something along the lines of, you can only really call yourself a cartoonist like if you've had a book in the last 2 years, which I have problems with that sort of definition in. But so because I at this time was like starting these two ventures of publishing, I was feeling like back in my comics bag, more than just kind of like playing at making comics. And I guess that's something I've always kind of had a strange relationship to, was identifying as a cartoonist because of the amount of time it took me, I feel like, to really be able to deliver like a coherent story, even though that's not always what I'm looking for in comics. The drawing of someone stressed. I also will often keep sketchbooks by my bed in case I had a great dream and I want to write it down. So here's one. Mall. I have a lot of dreams in the mall. Tabletop race car on highway. Alien creature designs freakish food court. Inhabit anybody. Giant pool. Here's another one. Terry Pheromone Ferris a mode. Sentient scooters. Here's another model. So the model means like maybe a year has passed, because it means drawn the nudies again. Because that class always runs every winter. This was a dream I had about Connor, one of my very good friends, that he fell into a bush and two stems were popping out of his neck with baby birds. I think, and this was before Diggy was born. Maybe more might have been pregnant. Had a wilt. This was the first drawing that ended up like inspiring the Pebbles 3 cover, which was, like a riff on Goya's Jupiter eating his son, right? Or devouring his son. But then like mixed with King Kong. This was a comic kind of reflecting on a mushroom trip I had had where um, my hands changed in the tub to like an elder man's hairy hands. Drawing figures again. This one has 4 drummers. Early witch gave me worms. Party City, Honkers and Squeakers. Currently, I am sharing my mind with 60 plus students in a single day. I am brain drained, bald, and empty by 5 p.m. This is a drawing of Diggy, my 2 best friends, Connor and Mora's child, playing one of the first times I babysat her. Here's a drawing of the Jane's Addiction poster that really blew my mind and ended up as a character. Blew my mind when I was a child. My sister had this poster on her wall. It's a plaster cast made by an artist and inspired a character in Pebbles. I feel like I'm taking too long. Let's see. Does anyone have any questions?
I mean, I have a bunch of questions, Molly. I
Yeah, you
can
ask
I
me.
can start asking you some if you want.
Yeah, sure. Ask me a question.
Okay, I can start asking some questions, and then if other people have their questions, as I have a whole so much came up to me as you were presenting these,
Okay.
and I think maybe one of the first you were talking about kind of I was mentioning something, and you were saying that you were kind of influenced by your students doing storyboards, and and that kind of filtering into your process to a degree. And as you're going through these sketchbooks, I feel like, what's coming across to me, and I've never seen this many. I think the last time I saw your sketchbooks was many, many years ago, and just a small snippet of them. So I first should say it's like what a pleasure to see these as a fan of your work. It's really it's a real treat, and I hate calling something inspiring, but this is very inspiring to see. But you just have such a there is such a like instant storytelling quality just to your single images, and there's so much happening within one of your drawings without packing in detail. They feel like natural glyphs of storytelling on their own, and I can see you developing stories just through the process of drawing. I see characters building as I see them repeated in your sketchbooks. So
Mhm.
I always have this experience teaching where there'll be a student who will be doing comics completely non-traditionally. They'll present their work, and I will say to them, "Oh, this is really incredible. You need to keep going in this direction." But the other students, when they present their work, will do things far more traditionally. And no matter what I tell that student doing things in a different way, they will slowly become influenced by how the rest of the class does things because that makes more sense, and they're inspired by what their fellow students are doing. So I kind of wonder throughout your process of making comics, just seeing these sketchbooks feels so like it feels like such a pure expression of what you do. I'm wondering about not just with teaching, but interacting with comics in general, how you feel that it's changed you, and if you would sometimes have to step away from maybe the comics world a little bit and reacclimate yourself to what you do that no one else does, if that makes any sense. I know this is an incredibly long question, but are there impulses within the comics world that you have to, comics that you see, do you have to sometimes pull back and go back to like what you do at core? Or is it kind of an exchange with what you see with your students making work, peers making work? Do you sometimes get influenced by it, or do you sometimes have to just remind yourself what you do that's unique to comics and that not many other people do?
Um, I feel like a funnel for all the things I'm inspired by. And I guess that's also why showing the sketchbooks is important to me, because some of it is like, uh yeah, it's kind of like, in here is where there's no rules and everything kind of butts up against each other, and then starting an issue or starting um a uh a more like focused project, I go back to the sketchbooks to kind of excavate ideas from them. So there, it's kind of a place where everything gets poured out without judgment, and then later I can go back with like the intention of making a story and find material in the books themselves, and that can be, you know, uh, of course that takes influence from like Chicago's such a comic city and all the sort of artists I you know get to speak with or see while I'm here. And a lot of my closest friends are teachers. Uh, and having that like process and bond, you know, talking about um, working with students, and then also seeing students like on their own path post school, or post, you know, our tutelage. Um, and yeah, I think it's, I never feel like I do have a tendency to like uh need to focus a lot of energy when I have like a big project coming and I have to kind of slow down the other processes. And comics feel like that. Like sometimes when I'm working on a comic, that needs to be like the only thing I'm kind of putting my energy into. Um, but I don't know, just I every idea kind of demands what form it'll take, whether that be like a I think the thing connecting it all is just narrative, right? But it's like what form does that story need to take? Is it read aloud performance? Is it a drawn comic? Is it a painting? You know, but I guess I worked really hard to have drawings that always, you know, feel like there's some kind of story imbued there naturally. Like that, I think that's just like um, that's just like the practice that maybe, you know, at one point I had to really work on, but now has become like intuitive um, over time. This actually this sketchbook is from 2020. Yeah. And this was started while I was in Seattle for Trailer Blaze, the residency run by Kelly Froh, who runs Short Run, where a bunch of cartoonists get together for a week, live in a trailer, and make work. So yeah, I think like collaboration and meeting other people and seeing their process, be that, you know, through getting to teach or through residencies or through just like making time to speak with and talk to other artists about how they make work, is so imperative. And I feel like comics can be such an insular process, and you have to like put in the effort to make sure you like have the space to communicate with other artists and like see what they're working on and share. Like that's why I was really excited when you asked me to do this, because I think it is like, yeah, that we have to find all these forms to sort of um, connect the dots between like how all these different, because so many cartoonists now are working in so many like unique different ways. Um, and yeah, I think it's imperative to have these conversations or share what that looks like.
You were looking through one of your sketchbooks and you were pointing at a figure, a drawing of a figure, and you were saying, sometimes people refer to the shapes of my characters as weird, which I don't. I think, like, what I feel is that the shapes of your characters are such a big. They seem to like really set the tone of the narratives, and I always feel like, I mean, there's all kinds of people that work with different shaped characters, uniquely shaped characters, but there's something about the way you draw bodies and the way those bodies, not just the way they're drawn, but the way those bodies like rest their weight on the page, the way they move through the pages, that to me is like one of the key features of reading one of your stories. And I'm wondering if when you're working on things, is it thought first and then you draw the shape of the body, or is it drawing, improvising, coming to a shape of a body, and then the narrative builds around that, or some combination of the two?
Uh, I don't think it's like the same every time. I don't know. I just kind of find the form through the marks, and I've never like really been interested in realistic anatomy. Uh, and yeah, my drawings of skeletons are like horrendous, laughable. Um, but I love gesture drawing. Um, and I don't know. I think that's why I like cartoons. Like I like comics. I like clowns. I like this like loose impression of a human um that but is like conscious of not uh having like a logic that the body must have or an academic drawing must have. But I don't know if I think I was maybe really conscious of that when I was first drawing figures, and now it's just become kind of naturally that way.
Yeah, now you have more of like a shorthand of how your characters appear.
Yeah, or how figures um yeah, they it I think the idea of like something being natural is just by practice, right? And I guess a big part of the unspoken part of this uh presentation is, you know, uh this being like a labor of love, but also like a lot of labor um through like a continued like sketchbook drawing investigative practice.
Do you mean your sketchbooks are a labor of love, or your project in comics overall?
I think I mean sketchbooks, it being like a labor, like I mean they're all a labor of love, but there's something like way more freeing about a sketchbook that maybe in comic is a lot more tight. And I think that was something I was always struggling with in the beginning, and then now I kind of embrace that. I embrace the structure of comics and enjoy it more now that I like have found a way to take sort of chaotic ideas and translate them through um, the structure of comics.
Can I actually ask you a little bit more about that? Because I think there was one point where you were saying, there's other like there was a period where there was other things you wanted to do. There were other art forms you wanted to explore, working with video or just other mediums. But now it's like I remember like looking at your Tumblr. It must have been 2013 or 2014. And up until that point, I think you'd put out at least one mini comic a year, and there'd maybe been a gap. And then you put up a drawing, a really beautiful drawing, and you said, in this coming year, I really need to draw more. And I think now, like in these last couple of years, it feels like there's just been you've always been productive, but there's been this true explosion of of work that's been made available. And I'm kind of wondering, you just mentioned like feeling more having maybe more control over the structure of comics, or some more level of comfort with the process of making comics, which I think it's like for anyone who makes comics, it's like this lifelong struggle to become comfortable with that process. But can you talk a little bit about like why this explosion of productivity from you is happening now, or what helped that happen?
Um, yeah, I think early on with the closed caption comic stuff, it was really cool to get uh accolades or people interested in our work. And I think it was uh, a big part of that was, oh, here comes just like a group of grinning fools, and they all, you know, have something, but like I think some of us were like very prepared to maybe make something uh, like an in-depth sort of comic, but we were also all like kind of figuring it out as we went along. And myself, I totally like, you know, I took a comics class with Brian Ralph, but he kind of just basically was like, don't don't learn anything about comics. What you're doing is so weird. Uh, keep doing that, which, you know, at the time I was like, okay, cool, but then was actually kind of frustrating because I, you know, was still trying to figure out like how comics even essentially work. Um, and then yeah, I think honestly just through reading a lot of comics, and part of that being teaching comics history class, teaching uh comics, you know, studio classes, which I know is like a real privilege to like learn while teaching. But it gave me like the time and the space to really um you know, my job became like talking about this history and reading it, and like in a room discussing it, and like having that like sort of uh that 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 like focused time to really look at like historically what has worked, because honestly like nothing we were doing was that radical in that early work. um you know, there's artists who are doing like just as interesting, or if not like way more powerful stuff, um you know, all across the century, all across the world. But it was like getting time to like really like read and sit with and digest um, that material. And just like, I don't know, artists need to hit their stride. Like, you might have some luck at first, like you were maybe uh, you know, drawing was my like magic trick as a kid. It was what made me quiet. It's what made me focus. But then through time and like you know, sustained, again, like commitment, um, I just got better at it. But I don't know. I've always kind of felt like jack of all trades, master of none. I've always, you know, kind of been trying a lot of tools and materials at once, and I don't want. And the more I was told to limit that, and like, oh, you should really focus and like find the one thing you're good at, um, the more I resisted it. But comics was always this uh, space I could come back to, or that felt like my work always, you know, even if it felt a little outsider, it always like was in conversation with. And so and it was, you know, what a lot of my friends were making, and a community I like really wanted to be a part of. And so I just like kept returning to it no matter what.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about following your work over the last couple of decades and the people that you were publishing with when I met you, so many of you you're not only still close, but you're still making you're like that core group is still making you've continued making work. Your work has continued to evolve in really beautiful ways. And you know, that's for a group that meets as undergrads in a certain program, that's rarer than, you know, in my adult life. That's I've realized how rare that is, that there's a core group of people that stick together and continue to make work together and evolve together and continue to influence each other. Can you talk maybe a little bit about how maybe that initially meeting some of your peers in closed caption comics, how you've continued to work with them and what you've drawn from their work and what they've maybe drawn from yours over the years?
Yeah, I well, I think before even meeting them, the first like I don't know, like culture that really made sense to me was just rock shows. And it was like seeing friends in high school having bands, right? And like the punk scene or DIY scene of Florida. I mean, it was mostly new metal, which is which is you know, uh a little bit funny now, even though it's back in vogue or never went out. I don't know. But it was really exciting to see like friends in bands. But I had like horrifying. I could not play music, and I had really horrifying stage fright when I was young. Um, and so I kind of went to shows as like a audience member and a supporter, but like loved that there was this culture of people like my age making stuff that like people would come and experience. And so then when I went to um, Micah, a lot of those people, we also just were like going to shows together. And it was the same, it was people who, like Connor and Chris and Molly and friends of ours too, like Early and Aviva and um, all these people, the people who were like not waiting for an opportunity, but just making it happen. Um, that was like that was Baltimore too. That's what like everyone was doing there. Like you wouldn't, apply to a company to have a play. You would find people interested in acting and like make a point to meet up and um and like figure it out together. And so that ethos is so strong in comics. And I think once you find those people who are willing to like make uh make a scene happen or like make your own uh art and make your own material, um yeah, you don't let those people go. You got to like hold them close because not everybody is willing to like put in the work or the vulnerability that that takes. um and so that's why we've a lot of us have like stayed in each other's lives, is because that's really magical to find. And you don't, I don't know, I I'm so grateful, and I feel like those connections continue to happen. I feel like I keep meeting people through comics, through music, or whatever, who are like trying to find and make their own culture, um, and that's, yeah, that's who you like. I don't know. You keep those people close. Does that make sense? Did that answer
Yes,
that?
yes. I have a question that relates to that. I have two more questions. So if people want to follow up on anything Molly's shown us, now would be the time to put your questions in the chat. But following up on that, creating your own culture with your peers. I've always known you to be, there was a period where you were, I think, recently, online showing a lot of like explicitly political comics. And I've always, ever since I've known you, you know, been very engaged and conscientious about all kinds of, issues that are important to you, and you express them in your work. And so I kind of I'm kind of curious how you feel now, like being an artist in Chicago right now. I don't know how much you want to say about how you feel about things happening in the city that you're living in, but being an educator and an artist in that specific city in this moment, if I have you here, this is something I'd like to ask you, maybe while we were at short run and I didn't have a chance to, but I can ask you now.
Yeah, I think that also was aided by teaching, right? Because my students were really motivated, um, to like, more so than I was at their age, to like participate in protest culture, and to, um, we had, um, yeah, Chicago has been, in some ways a city that, is being aggressed at to make an example of it. Um, and I'm really proud to say that, the the people organizing here, um, are, uh, completely like motivated in this way. Like the city shows up for each other, right? Like right now, there is, uh, people being kidnapped on the street, like, uh, elementary school, daycare center teachers, parents in school lines. Like a lot of my friends are Chicago public school teachers, and having to deal daily with, students like afraid their parents aren't gonna be home when they get there because, of ICE, and, this like concerted effort, to just steal Black and Brown people, um, wherever they're vulnerable, um, and, uh, it's horrifying, right? And I was trying to like make work about that on the internet, uh, but it also felt like that's almost it's not enough, and especially because a lot of the tools to share that stuff is, owned by companies that are, motivated to make that material like harder to access, right? And we're in this weird moment where like, uh, yeah, so many of the tools to share art are like intertwined with, uh, money and bad faith, uh, uh, like, trying to like confuse art and make it like harder to be about real issues. Um, and again, that's why like I think going to shows in person has been really important, to like sell things directly to people, to talk to people directly, to ask them how their cities feel or how their cities are affected, right in this like moment of, um, just like rampant fascism, and but also like not losing heart and not letting it like stop you from being, there's the like desire sometimes to completely isolate because you feel, you know um like it's hard to know what to do because there's so many, different, um
Well, can
but
I?
oh, sorry.
Oh, no, 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 no. I was just gonna maybe just and actually, could I ask you to stop sharing your screen since if we're just talking now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, I maybe just if I can um cut into that, like, what this is a question that's been asked a billion times in a billion different ways. But for you, I'm curious in what your answer would be. What do you think art can potentially do in a political sphere? It's a question I ask a lot. I I I often find political art, I would say 90% of the time, to be pretty unsuccessful. And not, even if it's well intentioned or even if it syncs up with my beliefs, I think as you say, in some ways it's not enough, or it comes off, it misses the mark in some kind of way, even if it's coming from a righteous place. So in a perfect vision of it, what might an artistic project that has politics in mind, what might that be to you?
Perfect project that had politics in mind. I mean, I think you don't. I don't know. I heard this quote not that long ago. Like no one wants to make political art, right? Like it's not like, I mean, some people like it's a desire, but it's usually out of necessity. And like having, or sometimes by chance, because it's going to be in the work no matter what, because of what you're like facing daily, or what you're like, especially now, like consuming daily. And it's it's the same as like I was saying earlier about catharsis in art. It's like, as makers, that's what we have to contribute, and we have to like find ways to use um our skills to meet the moment, at whatever that means, right? Whatever your skills are, right? Or whatever your, you know, what your currency, or what your ability to um uh help your community, your like direct community, right? um and so I don't know, there's no like perfect form. um I do really think like an important moment for me this year, I went to Mardi Gras for the first time. I swear this will make sense. And and there was something really important about just like being outside, being with people, like taking over the streets, but like of your own accord, and bringing a lot of joy to it, and like being in in a group that is like, this, we are, the city is entitled to us, we aren't you know what I mean, like we are taking this space together. And ideally that's what a protest feels like, but sometimes like, you know, people get afraid to be there, or people, or a lot of times it feels like it can be for nothing, right? Or
So
you
like
know,
an organic, like being an organic presence in the city with other, like a group of people that don't necessarily know each other coming together as an organic gathering, and that gathering doing things.
yeah. And like remembering that that's kind of what it's all about, is like being together. And uh I mean, art is a tool for communication, right? And like uh but it's also having time to make art. And like giving yourself time and space to make art is like a privilege. And so trying to find time in that space to like, okay, how can, you know, sometimes this is just for me, but how can I also use it to, you know, make better the situation in my direct community. um and I don't know, and the internet like makes that difficult, so I'm trying to find more opportunities, as many opportunities as I can, that are like more directly in person or with people. um and I know, you know, the internet is not, it's great, and I feel like of the generation I am, we got to experience like a little bit of when art and the internet can really be great and conducive. And like, I mean, that's probably how you and I in some way like found each other's work, or you know what I mean, or like aided the connections there. But we also have to do it in person too, and we also have to like have some core experiences, like not, I'm saying this talking to a screen in a room alone, but still.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did find your work first in person, but it's just as likely that I would have found it, a couple years removed, that I would have found it online first. Um, yeah, I mean, the internet is more complicated with art than just, obviously being a net positive or a net negative. Summer Pierre asks, and she says first, your work is glorious. Would you ever collect your diary comics or personal comics in a mini or a book?
uh I think so. I think like, yeah, once um I think there has to be time past, like I can never do it too fresh. Like I would never, that wouldn't be something I'd be releasing like as soon as I'm finished with something. But like now going through these sketchbooks and spending a lot of time with them this past week, I feel a little more like ready for some of that work to be out, right? Um, but I don't know. Yeah, I can't like I really admire people who are making diary comics like Summer who like release that work immediately, but I need like it's too fresh or when it as it's like directly happening, I need like a little distance from it.
Even the non like even the sketchbook things that aren't diary based that are just pure drawing and that feels too I mean you shared them all now but yeah
I
many of
know,
them
but
are kind of
as like an exercise of vulnerability, I guess. Um, uh, but yeah, yeah, I don't know, but that's I also like need like the reason the Colorama book worked well was I need an editor with that stuff too. I need someone to be like it's a nice experience to have someone that you kind of converse with because otherwise you want to show none of it or too much of it, or at least that's my issue.
this might be a silly question but I think like knowing different cartoonists or artists over the years sometimes there's people who are very hard workers and produce a lot of work but you know, certain different people over time have told me, sitting down to make drawings really it's painful, it's a struggle. I'm happy when it's done. I have a lot of pleasure when it's done, but the process of making the work is often it's like it's torture or it's very hard and it's not pleasurable. And so seeing your work, to me, it seems like a pleasure. It seems like you're having a lot of pleasure working in your sketchbooks. But since I have you here, I can ask you if that's true. Is it a pleasure for you to draw?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think sometimes when I'm making something for like a very specific purpose, there becomes like a lot more uh conflict in it, right? Like getting like making something finished. Um that's where like struggle comes in, but in just like pure drawing and uh uh yeah, just like channeling for lack of a better term. There's a lot of pleasure in it.
What are you continuing working on Pebbles and Shriekers? Is there what would you be working on now that we can look forward to?
Yeah, I am working on issue 4 of Pebbles. I am Shriekers is on hold for a minute because I kind of have to like I can't do them at the same time. So I finished Shriekers 2 in April. So Pebbles 4 is the next thing. I knew it wouldn't be done by this fall, so it's been kind of like on the burner as the fall is always like the busiest time and I need like a lot of focus to working on something like that. Um, but that's the next thing. And then maybe strip mall too.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, I'm trying to bring that into the mix.
Well, I
Uh,
can leave you with this question, Molly. You when I met you, you were working in Baltimore and we've talked about the community of cartoonists you knew there. Then you and many of your peers moved to Chicago. And Chicago is one of the centers of literary art cartooning in the United States. And I'm kind of wondering, it's different times in your life, different ages, but how you feel about the two different like can you talk a little bit about the effect that the Chicago cartooning community has had on you or maybe artists that you really value that maybe we don't know about your impression of just cartooning in Chicago? Because it has so many it's a really unique city for cartooning. It has so many like very legendary established luminaries who live there and continue to make work and are a part of the visual culture of the city, and it also has so many emerging talents as well.
yeah, it's and it's also has like these weird legacies, right? Um, of like eras of cartooning too, right? Like every decade had, publications or artists that, were so important to, especially like underground or alternative comics, or even yeah, newspaper comics, of course. It's really cool to be in a city that has that legacy behind it and has uh, institutions like Quimby's or a newer comic shop that's amazing as Howling Pages, and many other bookstores that are great like Pilsen Community Books, um, Perpetual Books, on and on and on. And then yeah, I think uh cake also like I think has a lot to do with why or just one other like Jenga piece of how that's like one of the first times I came to Chicago was for cake. Closed Caption Comics were special guests, I think, at the inaugural cake, which is insane, in 2012. Um, but I also think just like uh, artists who like just the Midwest artist kind of uh, idea, right? Like the Harry Who were here, people who like maybe aren't didn't want to commit to a coast, right? And wanted to maybe be like uh uh yeah, just like kind of existing outside like the more dominant art markets or something.
Is there
Uh,
a kind of Midwest, like, is there a style you see or a sensibility you see as being like Midwest cartooning?
um,
Kevin Huizenga or
uh, I mean, maybe initially, maybe like 20 years ago, but now I think everything everyone is getting like such a stew of influence that I feel like it's harder to have a uh like a look that is of one place. But yeah, cartoonists here uh that uh I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I don't want to start naming people because I'm gonna leave somebody out and it'll be um haunt me in a few hours when I'm trying to sleep. Let's be real, in like 10 hours when I try to sleep. But I think just the like people show up for like there will be, if someone has some sort of comics opening, right? Like Nick Trinasso had an opening a few weeks ago. Like people will come out who are from all of these different sort of generations or eras of cartooning, right? Whether they're like really new or Brunetti or Ware or Anya Davidson. Like, I think there is like a core support for comics that's so imperative here. Whereas when we were in Baltimore, it was a little harder to know, like there were heads there in like the noise scene, and there were heads there that were like experimental poetry and like and we were just these like why are these kids like still reading and drawing cartoons, which I think was like part of our edge when we were young. But now here it's like comics, is really embraced and like foundational in the art scene here, even if it chose to ignore it for decades. But there are, I don't know, but that scene is really crucial here, and I think maybe there was something about that like brought me here over somewhere like New York. Um, it does seem a little more community based, but I don't know. I've never lived in New York.
Well, it's wonderful to see. It was wonderful to see these sketchbooks and to hear, seeing such a having seen so much of your work over the years and then seeing so much work that I've never seen before. That was really a pleasure, Molly. So I really thank you for showing those. And
I'm sorry if this went way too long. Also, by the way.
no, no, no. These are supposed to go. Some of these go. We had Dana Walrath says your sketchbooks are fantastic and filled with joy. Thank you for sharing them in your process. Generosa Fiero says thank you so much, Molly. I no, these things are supposed to. Sometimes these go on for like 3 hours. Sometimes they just go on for an hour. So there's no. It's free form. There's no time limit.
Okay, but okay, but you're all free to go.
Well, no, people aren't free to go. They want to take advantage of this incredible opportunity.
Okay,
That's why they're
yeah,
still here.
okay.
Okay.
It was incredible. Thank you so much, Molly. I loved it.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for showing up. Oh my God, Diggy says hi.
Diggy says hi. And I should mention that next week we will have Jordan Crane as our guest for the
Oh,
New York Comic Symposium. So that'll be fun. So same place, same time, same way to register for that one. And we'll see you guys next week. And thank you so much, Molly. This was incredible. Bye for
bye.
now. Bye.